Tämä on teitä Radio Robin Hoodi.
Hello listeners and welcome to another episode of Conversation Oasis, a weekly discussion program brought to you usually from Kasviskeidas in the heart of Turku, but today we have a special episode since we are transmitting it here from Koroinen, Kahvila Koroinen. And it's a suitable place for this episode since we're talking about old houses, conserving the old things and versus the future, and also maybe change and
Destruction,
yes. And all that kind of stuff. So you're listening to Radio Robin Hood, and today with me in Conversation Oasis, I'm Ville, by the way, and also with me I have Jalal and Maria. Welcome.
Thank you, Ville.
And also I think, Maria, you have maybe things to say about this topic since you've been living now for 5 years in an old wooden house, 100 years old. And now you're going to move in the end of this month and you're looking for another kind of similar place to live. What are your sentiments or ideas about these old houses? You like them?
Is that this part of a student village also?
It's student housing, but it's not in the student village. Okay. It's close to the cathedral.
Okay.
So I live in an old wooden house in a shared apartment, and next to I have a view of the cathedral, and I think it was built in 1910.
1910.
Yes, it's quite old and very, very beautiful. Lots of light and history, and a lot of people who lived there before me. And I have to move since I wouldn't want to if I had a choice. But the contract is 5 years and it cannot be prolonged. And I have lived there now for 5 years. So it's my time to move on.
How is the condition in 1910? How is the condition of the house?
It's been renovated. So I think it's in quite good condition. And they have tried to sort of maintain the old vibe of the place. But they have done some renovations. I think it was in the 90s. But mostly we have wooden floors and
it's still warm enough.
Well, yes and no. I think wooden houses often have, in the winter, they have very good air quality inside. Because they sort of breathe. Yeah. People say that wooden houses breathe, which is true, but it also means that it can be a bit cold. And some people say that it's inconvenient to live in a wooden house. It can be quite expensive, the electricity, and it can be quite cold, especially the floors. And often it's not as sort of practical as living in a new apartment. And all of those things are true. But at the same time, I think old houses have a soul. They have lived here for such a long time. And seen so much. And I heard, because I have now lived 5 years in the wooden house, but I also spent my childhood and my youth in a wooden house, which was over 100 years old. So I have sort of grown up in old buildings. And a friend of the family said once that she feels that living in a wooden house, or an old house you could say, no matter what material was used, is a cultural act. It's an act to promote and preserve culture. And I like that idea that it's not just living there, it's trying to maintain and keep in good condition something that's been there a long time before you.
There are two reasons often that they destroy these old houses. I believe that one is that they want to make a high building, a big apartment that more people will live in there, and it's more economical and more profitable for the companies. And second, it's very expensive to maintain these old houses for companies. But how worthy is that for residents to demand this, to preserve these old houses?
Yeah,
how long we want to preserve them? Like 1,000 years, next 1,000 years?
it's a good question, and I think also it's a good question, and also the values. Like how much, if you think about the maintenance costs, and maybe you could tell it as a cost that you are thinking about the new building that could give you more profits. It's kind of a cost that you don't have that building right away, but you have to wait for 100 years to get that or something. I don't know. But then again, what's the value of the cultural value is hard to measure, because you cannot measure it in money in a sense. But just recently in Helsinki they renovated this coffee house called Ekbergs. Maybe you heard. So it has a lot of like favorite customers, or they like, how do you call, like vakioasiakkaita. Regular customers, yeah. And they were, most of them were apparently shocked because the interiors were changed. Like the interiors were quite the same as they were like 100 years ago, but after the renovation they changed the interiors to very modernized version. For example, they replaced an very old door with these slide doors, automatic doors, and people were, I think it was even comical to read how people reacted, because they were like, now it looks like a gas station, or now it looks like a shopping mall, and the lighting is like from a surgery room. Like people were a bit over the top with the critics, but still the question remains that how valuable it was for the whole society or community or the city, because that was one of the oldest. I think it was the oldest coffee shop in Finland. So renovating the interior to very modernized, you could say that it's a kind of like cultural damage in a sense, if it could have been preserved longer. So I don't know what the answer is to your question, that how long, but I think that if it's in good condition.
I have a better idea to my own question. I think in the end it's up to the citizens what kind of environment they want to live in. It doesn't matter if it's modern or old, but it's up to them. It's their environment. They have to make decision what kind of environment they want to have.
But in this case it was the interior which was renovated, and it was a private business. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that in the laws that preserve old buildings, usually it's the ulterior, like the outside of the building, the julkisivu.
Yeah, the like exterior.
Exterior, exterior, not ulterior. Exterior, which can be protected, but then the interiors can be modified pretty much, maybe with some exceptions. So in an old building like 100 years old, you could have like one flat that is very like 100 years old, and then another flat is totally modernized, and I don't know.
This is absolutely like one buy a home and try to decorate inside the home, and so citizen of one city should have right to think what kind of city they want to have for their as their living environment. I think probably it should be more discussed with citizens before any change.
Yeah, there might be. How about that kind of idea that if, say, maintaining old wooden house is expensive and there's some expenses, maybe there could be some kind of tax-funded monetary, like, I don't know, help for a cultural fund or something that you could, or association or something that could then, I don't know, somehow help to preserve it. I'm not sure. Just a quick idea,
But what sort of I often think about is perspective. I think old houses can be seen as a problem, kind of like from the perspective that they're not practical, they're old, they're expensive, that if you would tear all the wooden houses down, you could have a building that could house a lot more people and it would be more practical and cheaper, and it would be just better in that sense if that's the perspective. But I'm biased in every single way because I was sort of brought up almost 20 years in an old wooden house that had a history, and we had like some sort of old photographs how the building had looked before, and some old residents sometimes came in and they told about their memories. So I always felt that our house was alive in some way, and we were just a link in a chain in that house's life. And I feel the same about where I'm living now. So sort of I think my perspective often is, I completely understand that they can be seen as impractical. I often think about politicians and the housing decisions that are made. So from the sense like how can we house as many people as possible in a town for a cheap price, then probably the sort of answer won't be a wooden house that's 100 years old.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sort of, as I told you, I'm biased in every way. I just sort of have this sentimental attitude towards wooden houses, while completely being aware that not everybody has that. So I always hope that people get what they want, that I think forever there will be people who want to live in a very modern, very sort of, that has a sauna inside the apartment, has a balcony, and has all the props. And then I think there will always be the people who want to live in a very sort of old environment. So I hope there will be variation, that we will have both.
Yeah.
That not it won't be like that there will only be one possible place to live, and they all look the same. I want variation.
But, I think, but the private company will destroy them because it's not profitable.
It's not.
But if it's city is and people rather to have it as a city heritage. So they should, if they rather to have this old buildings, they should pay more taxes in case to maintain them and to preserve them. So I think this has to be more discussed in city council, more publicly in the local media, and so people should participate.
Yeah.
What kind of environment they want to live.
That's a good point. I think.
Yeah. I think, for example, the case of the coffeehouse in Helsinki probably is one of those cases that lifts the discussion up again, like considering that how much can be changed in quick time and what can be done to prevent it, for example, or at least discuss it.
Yeah.
And I really like your comment, Maria, about this history, you know, that the wooden house can have, and you're like a link in the chain, and there's this sentimental side on that. If you think about like things that you have in your apartment, you might have like 10 cups, coffee cups, but then one of those cups might have some history, like you have gotten it as a gift, or somehow you had it in your travels or something. You kind of value that cup maybe more than the random cups that you have. So maybe a house can also have this similar kind of thing. And I think that's it. That's like a real value also. And also what I'm thinking is that we've seen also what happens if this functionality is pushed to the limit. Like there used to be this architectural boom, like functionality thing, where these very super functional apartments were built. I think maybe this architect called Le Corbusier is very famous for that. They created, for example, in the United States, these big kind of enclaves with new buildings, and then people were supposed to live there, but people never found them really like interesting, or like they felt kind of like they were kind of alien at those super functional places. So I guess people still want at least some organic vibe to their living. I don't know.
When people demand something, it's a nice thing to listen. But when it comes to question that, what are you willing to do in order to have your demand? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People like to have things, but they don't want to do anything for that. So if we say, okay, if, for example, tomorrow they say that Koroinen and Kahvila is going to be destroyed.
I hope they don't say it.
If. And a lot of people, this is very legendary place. It's very old and it's good to preserve it. But people who are attached to it, if we say that, okay, you have to pay money. Some money. How much money do you think people are going to have? So these are the things that people don't want to.
Maybe there's no, I guess in Finland at least there's not much of the culture of actually like going out to the street or doing something really like concrete. But of course we could also, that's part of the thing, I think, and also other part is that there is necessarily not like a way of how could I act or what can I do. It's kind of blurred. Who should I contact? The city office or somebody else? And but I think you have still a point there. I think it's a good point.
I think it's sort of a similar point when people say that they want to support the local shops, that they don't want to go to the supermarket. But then often still they go to the supermarket and they don't go to the local shops. But in theory, they are all very like attached. They want to support the local entrepreneurs that have small shops and cafes and stuff. But still a lot of people, when it comes to their lives, they want to be practical and they want to have a wide variation of things. So then they just take their car and they go to the supermarket, even though they would like to do something else.
There's the force of habit. Also, I have a good example of this just from yesterday. I was actually on a walk with Maria and we were going to Keidas, and I spotted this little trash on the ground, and I was just pointing it to Maria. Look, somebody has been throwing this trash to the ground. And then I didn't pick it up. and Maria was like, but you didn't pick it up. And I was like, I'm too lazy now. and then Maria went back and picked it up. And after that, I started to pick up also the trash. And then we've been picking up the trash. Like today when we walked here, we picked it up. So there's like good, like two things about that story. One is that, okay, there was the force of habit that I'm not usually picking up trashes or something, but I still complain about it. But then when we started to do that, then we suddenly could do it. So, but you're listening to Radio Robin Hood. This is Conversation Oasis, coming to you this time from Kahvila Koroinen by the Aura River, and with me I have Maria and Jalal, and we are discussing about old houses and preserving them, and maybe some points around the topic. But I would like to actually go a little bit back to your, Jalal had this question that how long we should then preserve something. Is there some, do you think, Maria, that there's some kind of a limit where somebody says, okay, we have had this thing for 500 years now?
Yeah, some sort of time limit. Then it's kind of like
we've had this for a while now.
Yeah, now the time is up. Okay, the bulldozers, come on over. This has to go. It's a good question. Because then, why are we preserving and what are we preserving? I think it depends on the values that you attach to the place. I would like to think, because usually old buildings are built in a way that if you take good care of them, they will be around for a long time. And that can't always be said of new buildings. So usually the old buildings are built with care and they are of good quality. Not all of them, but many. They had a lot of like craftsmanship in the day, I think.
But this, Maria, these apartments we have now, like boxes, in next 100 years they are old also.
Yeah, because that's sort of a good question, because sometimes I notice you have tough questions. And I think my sort of comments just on being sentimental are not enough to answer them. But I noticed that there was this one building, Juslenia, a part of Turun yliopisto, the University of Turku. And at one point there was a discussion that should it be protected.
Yeah.
And I remember I laughed because I have had lectures there, and it's a horrible building. It's very ugly from the outside and the inside, and they've had a lot of problems sort of with the air quality and there's all sorts of problems. And then when I read in the newspaper that they were discussing that can it be torn down or should it be protected, I just laughed and I was like bring on the bulldozers, just take it down and build something different. And then I thought like, oh, but then I can't remember when it was built, but that's true. The things that we build now will be in the end old, and I think then it's up to that generation who lives then to decide whether they still find it, that it's something that they want to preserve. Because my mom always tells the story, because in the 60s, I think in the 60s and the 70s, there was this wave in Finland that like old buildings started to be destroyed because there was this wish and this sort of drive to be more modern, to have new things. And I remember my mom sometimes explained to me that she was very sad when in her hometown they tore down this bank that was very old, and it had a lot of details that she remembered from her childhood. And it was torn down and they built like a generic sort of box instead. But she always says that she understood why it was done, because there was this sort of wish that they wanted things to be better, to be new, because they were sort of wanted to go forward and not be too attached to what was before. And I think I understand that sort of. But then later on in life, we've noticed that a lot of people do not agree anymore with that decision. But I think it depends a lot on the attitudes of the people who live at different times.
But that was a bank. That's justified. Any bank is gonna be broken.
But it was a very beautiful bank.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that probably in that case also there's the point of like handcrafts used in making the buildings, that there are a lot of like old handcraft made details and stuff like that, which are not maybe coming back or at least are very like unique and all that. But also I have two ideas in my mind. One is that those like preservation laws for old buildings came after that boom of tearing down buildings in the 60s and 70s. And when we were talking about how long could a building persist, what if we think about those old buildings that we have? We have Tuomiokirkko here in Turku, and we have the Turku Castle. I think we are still happy that they are there. They are done in the...
I think they are a little bit different, because like if you knew that, for example, the Mannerheim was drinking coffee in here, that would absolutely make a difference for you, because there is some historical event on here. And Tuomiokirkko is more like historical, but private houses, you don't know about the history of the owners before. It's a little bit different.
It's different, but I was thinking because the history of important men, I think, is often kind of like, I think it's being called macro history, but then there's the micro history, the micro history, that is sort of the history of the ordinary people that weren't in the spotlight. And I find that often a bit more interesting when I think of the houses in like Portsa and Martti that have like large areas of wooden houses, and also Piispankatu. Raunistula. I often think of the sort of microhistory when I walk in those areas. Like I wonder what kind of people were living there. And I know I come from Pori, and my parents' house has been it's protected, the sort of exterior of the house. And they have like received information from the officials of what kind of like people lived there before, and they had some pictures of what sort of the place looked like in the 60s, and they gained information on the people who lived there before them, and I think it in a way made it more valuable. You saw it in a different light after you know a bit more about its history.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. But now I think, Jalal, you had many good questions, and I also started to think about the, like who decides and on what grounds, what is like valuable enough to be preserved, and I don't have an answer for that.
And also, I have an interesting question also about the future. If you think about what we value in old houses, we value certain materials and we value maybe the handcrafts. Nothing is basically preventing us from creating more new houses, which are actually made in the similar ways. So, can you imagine this kind of like a big story house in the central which has these handcraft details in it or something? That could be done. Of course, it costs more.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, that's the, like Jalal said, the city of all who live here. So
I
it's
have one question.
Yeah.
Before we didn't have machines so exact, but today sometimes the pieces of the building or of the household items are made by machines, but then we don't know, and we always ask, is this handcraft or made by machine? So then every time you have to ask, you know, is this done by, if you notice this is by hand, right away the value becomes real, and if it's by machine it loses the value.
Yeah, it's like a fake.
So what is,
Why?
I don't know, what's the point in here?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think we can have a follow-up discussion at that other time, like maybe on next episode, or to talk about the difference of, you know, values on handcrafts, and maybe nowadays we have 3D printers and all that. Is there something like intuition that we don't like the machines to do stuff? Yeah, we have still like 2 minutes to sum this up. I would like to ask also actually from Jalal, because Maria mentioned earlier that she's been now living 5 years in this old house, and she's been living childhood in an old house. What kind of houses you have been living in, Jalal? Have you been living in an old wooden house?
No, but every time I walk into the wooden house, I feel there is a soul in there. There is a history in there.
Yeah.
Cement doesn't give me any feeling.
Yeah.
That's why I really don't like them. But this is just my feeling. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting, because as biological creatures, there might be something like, you know, we have wood around us in a wooden house.
And the wood is something that used to be alive.
Yeah.
Another living thing beside us.
That's a very good point, I think.
Yeah.
On wood.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, listeners, and Jalal and Maria, and we'll return to the subject, and we'll hope that some diversity is left to the city and not all the wooden things are torn down. I think at least Koroinen is protected, so
I hope so. This is magnificent. It's a really nice place.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.